As they say, there is never a dull day in Malaysian politics. So a lot of things have happened since the last time we had a session. Khairy Jamaludin has been expelled from UMNO. UMNO decided that it's not going to have a contest for the top two positions in the elections. And of course, Nurul Izzah was appointed as the advisor, the economic financial advisor, and later on she said she uh, stepped down from that position, but she's still an advisor in the Minister of Finance. So a lot of things have been going on in Malaysian politics. So we will be discussing them today. Welcome everyone. Episode 55 of Teh Tarik with Walid with Professor Meredith Weiss. She is the right person to discuss this. She is one of the top political scientists in the world. She's based in New York at the University at Albany, and she has published a lot. You can just Google her and you'll know what I mean. Especially her work, her latest work. One of her latest works, which is one of my favorite. I assigned this in my class. It's a book entitled The Roots of Resilience, Party Machines and Grassroots Politics in Singapore and Malaysia. Okay, it's great. How are you?
Okay.
Is it 9 a.m.
I'm
in New
fine.
York?
I'm just,
Oh,
it's
thank you for doing this at this ungodly hour for you.
oh, fine. It's fine.
Yes,
I'm just
I
pleased that I could
was.
figure out Instagram.
I'm happy that we
I was very
managed to do
stressed. How do I make it
it.
work?
All right. Thank you so much, Meredith. So I introduced you already. So let's get to it, right? So I think one of the major things that have happened recently, I mean, in Malaysian politics, there's always something major, is Khairy's expulsion from his party, which was, it seemed like it was coming, but it was coming since a long time ago, right? So what happened there? And if Khairy, whom I think you know personally, or you've interacted with him before, if he asks you for advice, what will you tell
If he asked me for advice, I'd probably fall down flat in shock. But so I've interacted with him. I wouldn't consider him,
him?
or
Right,
he
right.
wouldn't consider me a close friend, just to be clear. But so I actually think he was not just pushing back, but he was really cocky about it, which is not at all out of character. He is more of a risk taker than many in Malaysian politics, in the sense that he's very much put his own desire to move ahead quickly ahead of the norms of the party and the norms of political contestation in Malaysia. And that was so absolutely obvious. I mean, it's never been far below the surface, but it was so obvious in his campaign promises to be the next PM, which I assumed, and actually was fortunate to have the opportunity to ask him about this, where I was shocked at the answer. I assumed that was a coordinated strategy among the sort of young Turks of UMNO, the youth gang and so forth, who wanted to start a new direction with Khairy at their head. But no, he said it was just a spontaneous decision on his own part, and he just hoped people would go along with it. And of course, I was thinking at the time, I don't think UMNO is really game to go along with that sort of thing if you haven't worked up. So I think that was really the issue, that this hadn't been so much a coordinated effort as a solo one. And UMNO just tends not to reward that level of individual initiative, especially when somebody else, which is inevitably the case, is threatened by it. So in that sense, what I would advise now is he's been very consistent in proclaiming that he is still fully on board with UMNO, even if they've kicked him off the boat. And so I would say he needs to find a new party. He is correct in saying that starting a new party
Right.
is probably not a useful strategy. That it's just the system isn't designed to accommodate that. He'd be wrapped into a coalition anyway. He would be in the same
Right.
position that Teh Tarik is, for instance. Probably Keadilan would be his best bet. That would, and we can get to that, but that would really depend on
Right.
whether Anwar sees him as a threat or as useful. But at least then he could run still in Singapore, in the same constituency in which he's been trying to build up his brand. Although that would mean displacing,
Right. Oh,
existing
that's
PKR members.
so much in there. So so yes.
You sent a question in advance. I had hours to think about
No,
it.
no, no. That's fantastic. So firstly, why would Pakatan Harapan or PKR be the natural choice, and why not PN? Why not Bersatu, which is UMNO 2.0 or UMNO 3.0, right? And secondly, yes, you mentioned whether Anwar would see him as a threat, right? Then what about the other people who are waiting in line as well, like people like Rafizi? Would they be too pleased? As in, genuine question, would they be pleased having him, somebody of his stature in the party, or would they see him as a threat internally as well?
I think both. I think he could bring in votes. He could possibly bring in seats. He would allow them to attract Malay voters, which they've wanted. And, you know, again, something we can come back to, Pakistan has not been excessively consistent in its alliances and so forth. So the sort of ideological divide might not be a huge deal. In terms of Bersatu, though, I think the issue is PAS. I really can't see his fitting well there or being able to rise. And even, you know, I have my own doubts, which I'm sure others also have, about whether Bersatu will be able to maintain its supremacy in terms of leadership vis-a-vis PAS in long term if Perikatan sustains itself. And so that really just doesn't seem to be a good fit for him. And in some ways, some of those in Bersatu are kind of are so old style UMNO that also may not be a comfortable home for him. And so I think it's really, if Bersatu moves out on its own away from PAS, then perhaps, but then also has no future. So, you know, it's a hard choice. In terms of Keadilan, I do think, you know, Anwar would probably have some doubts, but he's PM, that's what he wanted, so he can now be gracious. I think you're right that those like Rafizi would probably push back, but that might be for Anwar a way of splitting the opposition to him or the upstarts. So maybe there's some strategy there. So it's really a question of, Keadilan is known for being very much Anwar's vehicle that he has a strong control over. So to some extent, it may not matter that much if there's grumbling amongst the next ranks of leaders. And to an extent, it's a better fit for him. Not entirely. He's very much a creature of UMNO in all sorts of ways, but so are many in Keadilan, especially with the sort of removal of some of the older multiracial guard from the Reformation days.
Thank you for that. That was really useful. So you mentioned a word that people always associated, or at least they used to associate with Khairy a lot, which is cocky, right? And he has crossed swords with so many, and even if you look at his earlier days, right? Early days as a minister or even an UMNO backbencher, and the way he crossed swords with Anwar in parliament, right? It was beyond the level of the usual combative. It seems like there's something deeper there, right? So is it possible for? I mean, of course, Anwar and Mahathir did align, and they did put aside their differences temporarily. So everything's possible, I guess, in politics. Yeah, exactly. So it went. That was also inevitable, right? So, but do you think I'm reading too much into it, or do you think it's very easy, or it's relatively easy for KJ and Anwar just to put aside their differences and say, yeah, we both need each other?
I think as a strategy. So I think KJ still wants to be the next PM. It might be that he's willing to adjust the path that he takes to get there. And so Anwar would probably need to accept that this is somebody who really expects to be the next PM. So then the issue may not be whether Anwar himself is unsafe, because he's already there, right? So I still stick by my early theory. If you have heard that, the solution to some of the earlier impasse might have been let Anwar be PM for a day, check that off his list and move on. But
I feel like Malaysia needed. I feel like Malaysia needed.
Exactly. Yes. So I may be overly optimistic and thinking, hey, we've checked that one off, we can move on now. So I don't think Khairy really gains anything by trying to upset Anwar's leadership at this point, in the sense that is what is holding the coalition with Sahid, certainly. So that's what's keeping Pakistan in power. In fact, I mean, another angle that I really don't honestly know how to think through is how the coalition shifts the possibilities for whether KJ could enter Pakistan, just because they're now in alliance with UMNO. That might be that's a power play by Pakistan, and therefore Pakistan will do it. But who knows what Khairy himself wants. But I do think that Anwar might think, all right, admitting this person might upset Rafizi's chances of being next PM or any number of other possibilities. but would probably, have the charisma to pull it off, and that he and Rafizi could duke it out. And so I don't think it really threatens Anwar himself to the same extent that it would were this still the days of Anwar and Osman, were he entering when Anwar was not yet at the helm, but Anwar really does pull the strings within the party. And as we've just seen within UMNO, pulling the strings within the party really lends some potency. And there are aspects of Keadilan's structure that are directly modeled on UMNO's. Anwar, like KJ, Anwar is a product of UMNO. There's been a longer time away, but at the same time, that same sense of this is my party does.
So basically, because Anwar is already PM, he doesn't have to worry about a younger upstart, or if you can call KJ that, upsetting his his position, right? Okay, got it. So I think that's a good segue into the second question, right? So it seems like what is holding the unity government, it seems UMNO is crucial to Anwar getting a majority, right? And it's not just UMNO, it's Zahid being extremely crucial in that. So it benefits Anwar, right, that there is no contest for the party election, for the party presidency, or how do you see that?
I actually think I think he would be. I think this might be one of those areas in which what benefits Anwar personally may not be what benefits the party as a whole. So to some extent, yes, Anwar's connection seems to be, by all accounts, with Zahid personally. And I have no insider knowledge of that. I just saw the rumors come to life with the alliance and therefore believe them perhaps to be true. So to have Zahid out could, to some extent, imperil that connection. On the other hand, UMNO has nothing to lose by staying in government and everything to gain by staying in government at this point. They've already, backtracked on their principles by joining with DAP. Now, they don't gain anything by storming off in a huff because reformists come into power. The reformist central claim is that this should be a different sort of party that is less, from Khairy's perspective, certainly it's that it should be less nationalist. It's been saying that since, 2018. So I don't think it would imperil the coalition to have Zahid out of the top spot. At the same time, I think it would actually help Pakistan to have a not Zahidist UMNO as their partner. So I think part of the issue with forming the government as they did, part of it is joining forces with UMNO, which has never been Pakistan's, close friend. But I think the more problematic thing in my view was actually the inclusion of Zahid, just because of so much of the level of personalization, the sort of metonymy of UMNO equals Zahid. If you vote for KJ, if you vote for Zahid, therefore don't vote for KJ, as he himself has said on many occasions now. You got, no KJ, but yes, Zahid, flip the scales. So, and it wasn't just KJ. I mean, it so much seems to revolve around these key personalities. But in that sense, I think Pakistan would be helped by being able to show that they had actually somehow helped continue the path toward reform in UMNO. They then still have this alliance with a Malay party, which can bring in votes, but it's a less Zahidi Malay party. So less of that corruption, tinge, less of the old guard tinge. Of course, much might depend on who was actually elected. The fact that there would be a contest doesn't mean it would be KJ. I mean, Hisham would have at least as strong a bid, if not a stronger one. So
even while the coalitions were being negotiated, right? And it was clear that Hishamuddin, for instance, he said, no, Anwar, no DAP, right? And he was one of those named and shamed eventually. And Ismail Sabri also, he was a bit lukewarm, right? In his, So would that really hold true, what you just said? Because UMNO, it's true that UMNO doesn't have anything to lose, but they could also form government with another coalition, right? They could easily be part of another governing coalition.
I think the same considerations that came into play to make that unlikely this time would still remain an issue. So if you have PAS, Bersatu, and UMNO, and PAS is by far then the strongest party, I think PAS forms the government. So I don't think it really helps UMNO. It doesn't give them much advantage in terms of position, and it makes it harder for them to distinguish themselves. So within Pakistan, now that they've already, they all this, disrespect for DAP and definite lack of intent to form a coalition. Zahid no less than anybody else. I mean, this wasn't a foregone conclusion by any stretch. but they have a distinctive
Right.
niche within
Right.
Pakistan.
Right.
They
Right.
are the party that
Right.
blocks the green
The value add
wave
is higher
and,
in
brings in the
for
Malay
UMNO
vote.
in right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. In Versace, they're one of, or
Hmm.
in Purikatan, they're one of three main
Right.
Malay
Right.
parties and
Okay.
not the biggest. The only thing is that then Versace and UMNO might just, collapse into each other, which seems kind of likely, except then what happens
Right.
with
Right.
leadership and all of that.
So in essence, this was actually a move that will hurt the coalition government. You think the fact UMNO blocking the contest for the top?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's something. It'll be interesting to see the state elections, but since Pakistan and BN are running together for the state elections rather than separately, and I'm sure that'll be largely the sharing out seats, but my guess is they'll campaign together to form state governments that could drag down both parties. So the fact that I don't think anything about this leadership strategy in UMNO helps UMNO. I could be wrong, but I mean, there are probably some branches in which it does, but I think overall it's just not a strong move for UMNO, and it won't help to woo back voters who may have defected to Bersatu, not out of a desire necessarily for political Islam, but out of a
Right.
desire for a Malay party that's not
Right.
Zahid's Malay party. So I don't think any of this helps UMNO, and therefore it now much
Right.
more directly hurts Pakistan
Thank
than
you
it
so
could have
much.
in the
And you
past.
mentioned something that I find that many analysts have seem to neglect, or they just assume the green wave was just about a rise of political Islam, and there's that as well. But there's
Yeah,
also just we want UMNO, just not this leadership, right? Which is similar
right.
to 2018 as well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Right.
to me, that's the more compelling message. I mean, if you look at the data on PAS votes specifically and PAS support, yeah,
Right.
it's increased, but not that dramatically, like for PAS itself, just in terms of sentiment and political Islam. So I mean, PAS had been making headway beyond the northeast and the east coast in areas of Selangor and in areas, in some other communities in Peninsular Malaysia. But at the same time, it's not as though there's been a
Right.
sudden, that has finally taken off in a way it's never had before
Right.
or anything like that. Like this is
Right.
not a huge ideological shift that happened overnight and nobody noticed. Or
Right.
the polls 2 weeks before didn't even catch it because it was so quick. No, I mean, I think it's more accurately read as a reflection of the same thing we saw sequentially through the last several elections, which is a
Right.
secular decline in support for UMNO, in conjunction with the rise of major corruption charges and that sort of thing. And so in that sense, I generally do think it was
Right.
a teal wave rather than a green wave. But I do think among younger voters, certainly there has been an increase in support for PAS specifically. And again, in some communities. And if PAS does well and or if UMNO does poorly, then that can really set in. And then, there's not always, as you certainly would know, just from studying these parties, there's not always
Right.
a dramatic gap between what PAS wants in governing in policy
Right.
and what UMNO or any other
Exactly.
ethno-nationalist Malay-based party wants as well. I mean, yes, there may be a greater emphasis on Islam, but apart from a few policies that PAS
Right.
notably did not push for when it was in government,
Right.
there isn't a
Right.
huge
Exactly. No, but
disjuncture.
I completely agree with your analysis. But I think it's the less sensationalist claim, right? As opposed to
Yeah,
which was
yeah,
what was propagated by No,
boring.
I'm completely on board with you. I agree with you. So okay, so again, that's a good segue. So the unity government, and you talked about this, right? You talked about how UMNO has completely basically, I mean, it has, for its supporters and based on its own claims in the past, it has essentially sold out, right, quote unquote, by being in this government. And of course, Zahid later on said that, oh, we never hated the AP. We never really hated the AP. Mahathir
Right,
indoctrinated.
right. It was a secret crush all along.
Yeah.
Valentine's
Yeah,
Day.
so that was hilarious, right? But that is definitely true of
Yeah,
UMNO. But wouldn't you say that was true of Keadilan, Pakatan Harapan, DAP Keadilan as
yeah,
well? And even during the campaign, Khairy was, and he posted this even right after the results were out as well. He posted a video of him saying on the campaign trail, "Don't criticize me so much. Your leader," and he's saying to the UMNO crowd, "Your leader is the one
yeah.
who will have a deal with Anwar Ibrahim." So it was sort of open secret, right? That
Yeah.
that was going to happen, right? Even though
Yeah.
everyone was there.
Yeah.
Zahid was denying, Anwar was denying, but KJ called them out early on,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
isn't this a betrayal of the people, you think, on the part of Anwar and Pakatan Harapan? I mean, it may be that the ends justify the means, but the election was a rejection of UMNO, clearly. But then they became the
Yeah.
kingmakers.
Yeah, well, we can come back to whether the ends justify the means. I'm not so sure
Right.
what the ends are at this point, but I do think it is. So there were rumors all through the campaign that there were these secret negotiations between Zahid and Anwar, and at first I thought that was ridiculous. And I thought, hey, you never know. And then at the end, of course, it's like, no, I was the ridiculous one for not believing that. But I do think the fact that, and I think this is why it's problematic that UMNO, for one of many reasons, but a key reason electorally why it's problematic that UMNO is not allowing any sort of renewal within the party or contest for the top spots, and that the person in UMNO who now is at the top of the party remains Zahid. That it is
Right.
not Ismail Sabri who is deputy prime minister, despite all that stuff
Right.
about,
Right. Right.
Ismail Sabri will definitely be our PM,
Right.
not Zahid. He's just the party. No, that was clearly balderdash. Like that didn't, So I do think it is a betrayal of voters. I mean, voters rejected UMNO. That was unambiguous. They did not vote UMNO into power.
Right.
Zahid nearly lost his
Right.
seat, which is unheard of for a
Right.
party president. I mean,
Right.
Najib could keep sailing on through. And so there was not a vote of support for Zahid or for UMNO. And yet here they are in government and he's deputy prime minister, which is
Right.
really a
Yeah.
problematic
Yeah.
position.
Sorry. Yeah.
It
Carry on.
is
Yeah.
sorry. I mean, in many ways, it does betray, UMNO's claims to dislike DAP. Of course, a lot of the reasons that they gave for that are specious, DAP, communist, anti-Islam, and so on. So, maybe it's healthy that they've moved past that. But I think it's on both sides. I mean, this was not what Pakistan voters were asking for either. In fact, quite definitively not voting for
Yeah,
UMNO.
and I guess the betrayal was compounded when Zahid became DPM, right? It's one thing to have UMNO inside, and you have somebody like Ismail Sabri who is much more popular, he's much more amenable to the people, and people say, oh, this is an acceptable choice, right? But then to have Zahid there, it seems, and people were saying Anwar didn't have a choice. Did he really not have a choice? If he told Zahid, just step aside for a while, just be a normal MP or what. I mean, I'm sure there could have been more done, right?
Yeah. I tend to think that as well. And I have friends and colleagues who've said, no, you're right, that he has no choice. He has to give him that position. That's what holds it together. That's what convinces UMNO. It's like, I still don't buy it. Just because Zahid himself, again, was standing in for all that is bad in UMNO, and for good reason. Like, that wasn't a totally surprising position to be in. So, no, my own take is that it would have shown at least some extent of internal consistency for UMNO, which again had been saying all along through the campaign, you're not voting for Zahid, you're voting for Ismail Sabri. Ismail Sabri is, and so now they basically said, screw you, you're voting for UMNO, which you didn't think you were, sorry. And you're also voting for Zahid, which you definitely didn't think you were doing. And so, if we were to replay the election now, I think that would be, they might get even fewer than the few seats they got. So it's just, to me, that was, I understand the logistics of, you build a coalition in which everyone has an interest in its stability, it's sufficient, just Pakistan plus East Malaysia had enough seats, but it doesn't have a legitimacy, it's not going to be stable. So I can understand the logic behind it. And yet, the Zahid piece seems
absolutely.
gratuitous.
I agree with you as well. So I also found that, and we both of us, you more so than I mean, we have a lot of friends in Malaysian civil society, right? And I noticed that civil society was also I don't know whether complicit is too strong a word, but when the coalition was being rumored, there was already a lot of preparation. I think people were writing op-eds, giving commentary, saying that, it's okay for Zahid to be DPM, it's okay for this. And I don't know, how did it turn so fast? Like, just a few weeks ago, it was about rejecting UMNO and the corruption of Zahid. How did, he's actually an choice to be DPM. Yeah.
I don't quite know. I think a lot of it is I'll try to psychoanalyze Pakistan as somebody with zero expertise in doing that, even for humans, let alone parties. But there seems to be this sense in Pakistan that,
Right.
they're lucky to be alive, and that if somebody's willing to play with them, then they're going to play with them, So, which, I mean, humility can be a good thing. But in this case, it seems a little over the top. So I was still remembering that, the night of the election, I was watching the results with a group of political scientists and statisticians and so forth, survey researchers, and we all just assumed that Pakistan was forming the government.
Right.
It just never. Once you see
Right.
that they have that many seats,
Right.
even though Pakistan has a few more, but come
Right.
on, it's Pakistan. Who's going to work with them? And so it seems as though that was
Mm.
Pakistan's thinking as well, such that really we still have a choice. Where I really didn't. It was, I think, like 3 or 4 in the morning that one of these colleagues said, well, actually, they're
Right.
talking about maybe forming the government.
Right.
It's like, whoa. And so in that sense, it might be that Pakistan has, and including its supporters in civil society, has so deeply internalized
Mm.
this
Mm.
sense of
Mm.
inferiority in
Yeah,
Malaysia.
of course.
Not that they're bad people or bad
Right,
party,
right,
but that
right.
they're never going to be popular. That they'll join whoever sandbox wants to invite them in, or whatever the correct silly analogy would be. But it's just, whereas UMNO doesn't have that same sense of
Yeah.
deference. They feel entitled to be in government and to do so on their own terms. And so I think it could be that it does seem that Anwar in this case could have legitimately said, no, actually, UMNO, we don't technically need you. You are a kingmaker, but you're not the only kingmaker. We have actually another option here. But he didn't. And so it does make his position probably more stable, at least in the short term. I do think, though, as I said, that it undercuts the party in as much as it shows a lack of principles for
Right.
Pakistan and
Thank
for
you.
UMNO both.
I think that was an excellent piece of analysis. So, speaking of principles, Anwar as finance minister, that's another one that is sort of, yeah, and that was it seemed like another unnecessary one as well. Then Nurul Izzah as the advisor.
Yeah.
So, in the parlance of Gen Z, right? So,
Yeah.
do you think she's a Nipo baby? That's true.
She's one of so many in Malaysia. I mean, so I actually, this will be a very American thing to do, but I own that identity. So I tried, my first thought when I heard about this was, well, she is very qualified. But then I thought, all right, so I was really angry when Donald Trump brought his family into office with him as unpaid advisors because nepotism. And so this is not different from that. She is indeed qualified, and it's perhaps to her disadvantage that having lost her seat and having her father as prime minister, she now is essentially shut out of government, because to enter would be having a family governing rather than a person. And so what makes it challenging is that this is, her advisory role is not unusual in Malaysia. We have, at this point, such a growing trend toward dynastic politics. If you think of, the DAP Lim family, of, how many more members might enter in time. Not unlike, there might be some families like that in Singapore. We'll, won't go into details, but it's possible, right? But certainly, I mean, there was such pushback against the extent to which Rosma was Najib's confidant and advisor. So the fact that, Rosma is wholly unqualified, Nurul Izzah is qualified, that is a difference, but she is still a family member. And generally, even in my university, I have to sign, with all the conflict of interest statements, the fact that I'm not bringing in family members, and the fact that they're getting paid or not is something of a red herring, especially given the structure of the political economy in Malaysia, in which the money isn't coming through your salary, it's through everything else and the connections and all. And I'm not saying that Nurul Izzah or Anwar is necessarily corrupt. I have no idea. I'm assuming not. But it's just that it's the fact that she's not taking a salary, that just means she has enough income from other sources or enough accumulated wealth that she doesn't need to. So that itself is not what determines whether this is right or not. So no, I do think it's problematic. And I do think that this increasing trend towards dynastic politics is probably not the healthiest thing for Malaysia in terms of having a more inclusive polity in which all feel that they can advance. And to some extent, it's also, I would think it's strategically, assuming Nurul Izzah does intend to remain in governance and to run for office again, particularly since she had made a principled stance against her father and other boomers of his generation, remaining in power. I think it actually behooves her not to be seen as a Nepo baby, but rather to continue on her own with the sorts of, anti-poverty policies and so forth that she'd been doing before, perhaps at
right,
Rafizi's camp, perhaps outside Pakistan, altogether, but just to build up her own identity. Since she
right.
did enter politics as the daughter of Anwar, this is her chance now to kind of break further away from that when she's already cut a lot of those strings. I was really surprised to see her come back into that fold and then sort of
Yeah,
sully her reputation, I think, a little bit. Like, it's not necessarily damaging in
yeah.
the long term,
I
but it was sort
agree
of
with you because I
unnecessary.
actually like her, and I think she's one of the, as far as Nepo babies go, she's one of the more qualified
Yeah.
ones and clearly intelligent and so on. And she's not
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
only one you
Yeah.
mentioned,
Yeah.
right? And there's Hishamuddin, Najib
Yeah.
himself,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
so she's by no
Yeah.
means the
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
offender. But
Yeah.
it seems so strange that this is such an unnecessary move, even if they wanted to still keep her in the public
Yeah.
eye, right? There's just so many other ways to do it, right? A
Exactly.
state seat or
Yeah.
senator
Yeah.
even,
Yeah.
right? But this was so unnecessary, and I think, yeah, I think
Yeah.
that
Or a
exactly
think tank or just
right,
policy
which
advice. Like,
Anwar
there's
did for
so
a
many
few
other
years,
ways.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. 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 And
right,
policymaking is so opaque in
right,
Malaysia anyway. She could have
exactly,
just as much influence, but without having this, like, without
right.
bringing
KKN,
KKN,
yes, right.
that sort of specter of nepotism
Corruption,
into
cronyism,
Malaysia.
and
Yeah.
nepotism,
More
right?
than it already is.
And again, like PKR,
Yeah.
its
Yeah.
own his whole mantra and its whole ideology or so-called moral justification is anti-corruption and justice, right? So it goes
Yeah.
against everything that
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
they purport to
Right.
stand for. So I thought it was unnecessary. I'm surprised
Right.
she initially took that position as well. But I guess I don't know. I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe they are also thinking, oh, we don't know how long we are going to be in power. Is that yeah.
That also could be. Yeah, I don't, and I haven't asked her about it, so I don't know her thinking on it. But yeah, I'm sure one of these people listening can ask her probably personally.
Right.
So why did you take it? But I'm really curious, because yeah, it seemed, especially since she
Right.
wasn't his biggest supporter anyway, in terms of his position within the party. So I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah, it I think this idea of the extent to which there is increasingly pervasive, again, if not nepotism, then the dynastic leanings within Malaysian
Right.
politics.
Right.
That's across all
Right.
parties. So you mentioned Najib, of course, he's as, not to be the son of a prime minister and still manage to be prime minister.
Right.
Amazing. Or, Mahathir's family, and of course that then, because of the nature again of the political economy in Malaysia, that then
Right.
spans both business and politics, and those become even more closely intertwined when we have, almost but not
Right.
quite Philippine style family networks, that really start to control areas in this sort of warlord phenomenon that we do also have in Malaysia. Right now, what keeps that a little bit off balance is probably the fact of an unstable partisan system that, you can have an UMNO warlord, but if they lose their seat, then that position has less staying power than a Philippine-style dynastic politics where they just won't lose their seat. But at the same time, it doesn't really seem to behoove Pakistan to make that more visibly
Right.
worse
And
than it already
your
is.
point about the not taking salary thing being a red herring. Oh, that's a great point, right? Because I mean it's about access to power, and people have to
Yeah.
go through you and curry
Yeah.
favors and so on.
Yeah.
Just the way the political economy is structured
Right.
there. Yeah. Thank
And it reinforces which people
Right.
have the
Right.
wherewithal to take
Exactly.
an unpaid
Yes.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Actually,
that
that's
actually is not a
something
good thing
we
to
need to
stress.
ask also, right? How is it that you can do a job which yeah. Anwar was
Yeah.
also you remember he
Yeah.
was the economic advisor to the Menteri Besar of Selangor, right? And he took a salary of RM 1 as well. Yeah, there's a lot of strange things that go on.
Yeah.
So do you think Anwar's government will last till the next election?
So that's probably the hardest thing to answer now. So when is the next election? That's one way to make sure he does. It was so much fun last time. Let's do it again. Yeah. I think there isn't a viable alternative. So I think that will hold it. But this actually it gets back to sort of something I mentioned earlier is, whether you mentioned something that is worth the trade-off. So right now, what they've succeeded in doing, and I've complained about this publicly in the past, so I don't mean to make this a hobby horse, but what they've succeeded in doing is taking power. This awkward coalition, and the goal seems to be just to stay in power, not to
Right.
govern. There are still no goals. There's no,
Right.
there was that committee supposedly formed to look at their
Right.
manifestos and
Right.
see, wait, what was it that we promised again? What do we have in common? There actually
Yeah.
is a lot that's in common across the manifestos for not just BN and PH, but also for
Right.
the East Malaysian parties and coalitions that are part of this. And yet, they're still echoing what happened for the last two iterations of the government post GE 14. There still
Right.
isn't any sense of what is the agenda? For what are they governing? And so, yes, they may stay in power because once you're there, there's a degree of entropy, I think, and so they can cut off some challenges, and more to the point, if Perikatan couldn't form the government initially, there's nothing to say that magically they'll be able to now. In other words, there becomes a sort of vested interest. UMNO is already, backed down on its anti-DAP principles and joined DAP. Pakistan has joined Zahid. The loss or sunk
Right.
costs already, and so there's all the parties involved in the government have a vested interest in staying there, and there isn't a viable alternative. The rumblings in Sabah, possibly Sarawak, if that then bleeds over, could perhaps destabilize to a certain extent, but not dramatically, and that seems to be hurting Bersatu more than anybody else. So yeah, I think that they can probably stay in power,
Right.
but I'm just not sure what they'll do with that power. I don't foresee, a major reformist initiative or anything like that. It'd be nice if at least some things that are common to the platforms go through, but there just doesn't seem to be much of a will to test, how strong is consensus on policy. It's one thing to be in government together, but are they willing to share credit on whatever the government achieves beyond some basic,
Right.
giving people money type
Right.
things, which are popular all around. And saying that even to say, okay, people can't withdraw more from their, retirement funds, that's just, a good moment of fiscal probity to say, people need those funds for something other than right now. And so I'm just not, I think they can stay in power. I'm
Right.
not sure how
Right.
effective a government
Thank
will
you.
be.
So there's a comment here by Kasra before I follow up on that. So Kasra said that changes need more power, but appointing his daughter really raises concern. It's between having faith on Anwar movement, especially for Sabahans like us. And I guess this is the bind that a lot of
Yeah.
Malaysians find themselves in, right? On one hand, they do not like the other side. On the other, you see your side do all
Yeah.
these sorts of things that you really cannot justify. And there is also a sense of,
Right.
exasperation. It seems like in the comment here, there's a sense of exasperation on the part of those who are supporting Pakatan as well. And they're saying basically we have no choice, right? What can we do? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right. And that unfortunately that pretty much sums
Right.
it up. If you are a non-Malay voter, if you're Sabahan or from Sarawak in Malaysia, there's something of an alternative in as much as that you at least have the bulwark of joining a state-based party, a state-based coalition, and asserting somewhat greater sway that way. But I do think, and this may be part of the strategy, that the power to exact benefits or to extract benefits that Sabah or Sarawak, GPS and DRS in particular, but also Warasan, could have exercised vis-a-vis Pakistan is diminished by the fact of their sharing kingmaker status, the fact that BN is there as well. So, at the same time,
Right.
yeah, what option do they have? They won't have greater sway really necessarily with Pakistan, and then PAS
Right.
again is an issue. PAS just is not strong in East Malaysia, full stop. And so,
Yeah.
but if you're a Chinese voter anywhere in Malaysia, which, the majority of
Right.
Pakistan's voters are non-Malay, what choice do they have? And so but it's like, that's not an
Right.
empowering, uplifting way to proceed in politics, right? It's just the realities in many ways of the Malaysian situation. But then there is this moment in which one could imagine this, especially multiracial, balanced, I don't think it's the word, multiracial coalition, if we include both PH and BN, actually trying to shift those terms of politics. And I just don't
Right.
see much
Okay.
will to
There's
do
a
so.
question here by how does Anwar's appointment of his daughter show a lack of trust and unity in the cabinet, and that's why he had to get his trusted partners to office? That's a good question.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I've heard the same about having Zahid as DPM. It's just, and Anwar himself as finance minister, that who else could he, he can't give it to a BN person.
Yeah.
He can't give it, it's like, who do you give that to? If you give it to Rafizi,
Yeah.
that's a pretty lame answer. I mean, it suggests, a lack of trust, a lack of belief in succession within a party and building up the ranks versus personalization. It echoes Mosley's, saying, only I can be president of my university or whatever the role was, or chancellor, while also being education minister. No, that's just flat out wrong.
Exactly.
That
That's the word. Yeah.
And he's a nice guy, but still, like, I mean, it's so just fundamentally anti-democratic. The essence is supposed to be that it is not about any one royal-like being, but rather the will of the people. And of course, that's naive and all that. But no, I think it does suggest a lack of trust or a lack of close confidence, perhaps within the party. Perhaps he also thought that picking his daughter would maybe be a way around some of the issues of, is this a person who's associated with my party, with this other party? But he brought in other advisors who I think seem fine. I mean, so far as I can tell. So yeah, I do think to some extent it is this idea of trying to get your close allies around you for fear of a push of some sort, or just a lack of trust in others.
Yeah.
But it's not a good
I
look.
need to do this because there's nobody else for the job. Said every dictator ever, right? Like, you can justify anything. You can justify anything with that, right? And the hubris in that kind of statement, right? Yeah. But that's exactly.
And it's like, well,
and you had, it's not as if
like,
FPKR was formed 5 years ago. Like, if I know Bersatu maybe has that excuse, right? But PKR has been around for 2.5 decades. So yeah.
Or sometimes, I mean, maybe there's a woman that you haven't noticed.
Other than your daughter, there may be.
Exactly.
Right. But it is. So Nurul Izzah probably, most likely, she wouldn't be in politics if not because of her father. But it's a shame that she will always be judged against this as well, because I think she is superb. Yeah.
And I think she's really made an effort to carve out, partly by vocally pushing back, but she has made an effort to carve out a policy profile for herself that is specifically distinct. And so it doesn't trash that, but it doesn't really help her.
So I had another question to follow up on your previous answer. And so you don't see any opening for, basically Anwar's government is quite safe. What about statutory declarations, right? Which doesn't involve these UMNO people leaving the party, but they are pledging support to another, because that one, it seems like it's constitutionally viable. So do you see that happening? If, let's say, Hishamuddin and Ismail say they're tired of Zahid, but they're not going to leave UMNO, they're just going to pledge support to a Muhyiddin or something like that.
Well, it would still face a constitutional challenge, and so it seems like it might be viable, but it's not really clear what that means. In part because what does it mean to say, look, I'm not going to leave my party, but I'm going to give my support to the leader of another party. That
exactly.
is kind of leaving your party. So because UMNO would be hard pressed not to oust them from the party were they to do that, and at that point they lose their seat. So that means that the only thing that's holding them in their parliamentary seat is UMNO's desire not to lose its role in the government. But it basically, my sense is that would just sink the government, because they couldn't really hold on to members who say, I'm an UMNO member, but my PM is going to be the head of Bersatu. Don't kick me out of the party, because then the government will collapse. And, I don't see that as really viable given the anti-hopping law. The anti-hopping law is not a great solution to weak party institutionalization. It is a pretty lame response, it's just, but it is also the only thing that's holding the government together right now. So I can critique it and also say, probably I was wrong about that one. That is definitely a good thing to have the night after the elections. But at the same time, what would be better in the long term is if it is not so easy just to say, my party is so similar to this other party that I can just jump back and forth based on the shifting tides, because that is the case right now. But so I don't think the statutory declarations, for two reasons. One, it because of the anti-hopping law, it really does run the risk of sinking the government. And I don't know the minutiae. There's so many of these, odd things that party members in Malaysia or MPs have to swear to. And PAS, of course, is, you'll have to divorce your wife or whatever, like these really sexist things as well. But then you have these, just these things of what sort of loyalty you have to pledge, which we know was an issue for UMNO as well in terms of pledging to support the party president. So my guess is that would actually be something that could, based on what they've signed, might automatically oust them from the party, in which case you trigger, again, an election. So there's that part, but there's also to rely on statutory declarations really asks the Agong to continue with the role that he has been taking, but to be more proactive in doing so, not to wait until a government has collapsed or a government is waiting to form, but instead to help to precipitate the collapse of government. And the Agong is wildly popular. I think his role in helping to get a government set off the ground probably only strengthens his popularity.
Exactly.
Undemocratic though that is, it's still this sort of balancing force. But at the same time, I'm not sure that would be a wise move or something the Agong would necessarily want to do, or the Council of Rulers would want to do, of precipitating the collapse of a government by saying, you know what, there is a government, but we're going to start taking statutory declarations to overturn this government. Maybe at the state level, but not. I think
you brought the Agong in, right, and it's quite extraordinary, right? Even people who are not necessarily pro-monarchy, right? They appreciated his role over the past 2-3 years, right? Even though, as you say, like, it's undemocratic, right? Like him suggesting this, for instance. He's the referee.
That's the referee.
Exactly.
It's like we've got these people, like everybody says they can form a government. Everyone
exactly.
PM.
So he's the
who do we go to? They can't go directly to God, so you go to the Agong.
Some people claim they can. Sorry.
That's why I use the English term instead, because if I don't say Allah, then it's not supposed to say.
So you're right. I think that's the he was seen as the referee, right? And that was and in some ways, especially early on, right? He was very restrained in his. I can imagine somebody else or other sultans would have been more would have exercised more executive discretion.
I would imagine that too.
Yes,
or at
exactly.
least touted their own role more instead of trying to keep it a little bit more in the background.
Right, exactly.
But
So
really
there are two questions here by Arun, and then we'll wrap up. So the first is, do you think that this maneuvering and the perceptions that surround Anwar's cabinet, it will actually directly impact his ability to execute policy? And I think you sort of touched on that earlier, right? And then what is this government's plan now? It doesn't seem like there's an actual plan. And secondly, how do you see this shaping Malaysian politics moving forward?
Okay, so these actually could be quite different, or I could link them, so I'm going to try to separate them more. But so in terms of the maneuverings around the cabinet and policy, it's so hard to say. I mean, again, a key issue is I still don't know what the policies might be, or if it's just maintaining the status quo. But for instance, will Pakistan's long-term agenda of institutional reform, of civil liberties, of all of that sort of stuff, some of which was put on hold already after GE14 with the entry of Bersatu, some of it wasn't, will that come back? Will they push for things like, that UMNO would also support it, like a political financing act? That could be a clear win. It would probably be watered down like the last version that almost went through Parliament, which doesn't do a whole lot, but all parties support. Perhaps Bersatu right now. So it's a good moment for it. But, so at the same time, we haven't heard really much in the way of proposals or plans apart from the occasional sort of voice, Azalea saying, we'll separate finally the attorney general and the prosecutor, and then crickets, so and there may be that there's more that's going on behind the scenes, and I am far away, so fully aware that I may be missing things, but I'm sure your listeners will let you know if that's the case. But I do think to some extent this as is the case always in Malaysia, a hand-picked cabinet of loyalists does make it easier to get things done. I was kind of concerned, as I know some others were, by the fact of who were given some of the portfolios. Like, it's just such weird politics that something like, Dr. Zul isn't the Minister of Health, but somebody who has no necessarily experience in that area. I would have loved to see stronger, not necessarily stronger, but just more experienced people in roles related to education in particular, just because that so much needs reform and could be an area of reform and could be bipartisan, just Malaysia needs that. But of course, I'm totally biased as a, professor, but still. and so, I mean, I wish that the holders of those portfolios well, but it's impossible to know what to expect because they're so new. But so in terms of policymaking, it will help in terms of consensus. It may not help in terms of actually having ideas and expertise and a plan for what they should do. In terms of what this means for Malaysian politics moving forward, the others have, Liu Chintong was saying long before the election, for instance, that this might be, that what marks, starting from before this government, but Ismail Sabri's in particular, ends the idea of a strong executive. And I think that is, on balance, just a plus for Malaysia. To have less executive centralization is good. At the same time, in terms of party institutionalization and so forth, this is something I've been writing on. I think that the weaker party, so the parties themselves are weaker. There's less of a sense of what they represent, how one moves up in the party, how differentiated they are, all of those things that define this is what Pakatan stands for or what Keadilan stands for. This is what UMNO stands for. Those are hard questions to answer now, and to an extent that they haven't been in the past. And then the party system is also deinstitutionalized. We don't have a sense of these are the normal voters that vote for X, or this is the level of volatility in the elections. And so like predicting the next poll will be super hard. There was already this issue of how many will show up to vote when we have 2018 and all these previously unregistered voters now registered. But now we also have really unknown loyalties and probably a lot of disillusion with parties. And so that deinstitutionalization has a long-term effect and is directly the result of the developments in BN over the last really couple decades at this point, but certainly the last, since around the last decade in particular, basically as one MDB started ramping up around 14, 15. But then also this coalition government, which really suggests it doesn't matter who you vote for. And so I think the long-term effects there could be really quite significant, and not, they could still be overcome. In other words, there may be a new equilibrium that settles in over time, but I really can't imagine, and I hope this wasn't your next question, like what to expect for GE16.
Right.
Who will contest whom? Will they still be best buddies, or will the divorce have really set in firmly? I mean, it was already messy enough to say, PAS with Bersatu and then UMNO separately, to pretend that they had never liked each other, never when
exactly.
they were in government together. So this is going to be really tricky, I think, to see.
Thank you so
forward.
much. So that was the most Paul Science-y part of the party system institutionalization. And it's interesting when you mentioned there seems to be a lack of clear agenda or plans on the part of this government. As troubled as the Pakatan Harapan government under Mahathir was, they still got a few things done, right? That you can say that this was significant achievements, or at least attempts. And we haven't seen that kind of will.
Even with the MOU under Ismail Sabri, I was kind of hoping that might be the result, would be another confidence and supply agreement, because then at least you have an agenda.
Right.
It collapses if you don't pursue that agenda, and I think that was really what made Ismail Sabri the reformer.
Exactly. Okay, so let's try to end on a positive note, right? So
there's a government.
So the entire thing has been demoralizing, right? From Zahid becoming DPM and PH immediately when they got power. There's a saying, right? Any person can stand adversity. You want to test a person's character, give that person power, right? The moment they got power, they immediately renege on a lot of things that they have been campaigning on for years. It's not like 10 years ago, like for decades, right? But okay, all those negatives aside, right? But would you say that this is a win for democracy, and Malaysian voters have shown that Mahathir was voted out, and I don't think he's not popular suddenly at least with conservative Malays, right? And Khairy voted out, Nurul, Izzah voted out. I mean, Malaysians are really not afraid to use the vote, and the fact that we have had two transitions through elections, and of course in between we had two other prime ministers, right? We had two transitions which went ahead without violence, which is, as you know, right, this is a remarkable achievement. But maybe because we've seen a lot of elections happen in the West, and it's nondescript, and we tend to underestimate the significance of that in Asia. So would you say, all in all, it was a win
right?
for democracy in Malaysia, or is that a bit of a stretch?
I'm going to separate that out. So democracy as a whole, so hard to say. I think actually the most encouraging aspect for me, so I mean, in terms of lack of violence, that of course is a good thing. There isn't a history of military involvement in Malaysia to the
Right,
extent there is in like Indonesia, the Philippines. So in some ways it's less surprising, but
right,
that still is actually, it's actually a relief that the
right.
outside sort of non-party parties that get involved are
Mm,
the rulers, but not the military. That is reassuring. But the biggest thing for me that gives some hope is the turnout, because there was strong reason to expect the turnout to
right,
be in 60%, right, or closer to 60% rather than over 70% as it was, both because of the new voters and again previously unregistered voters. If you didn't bother to register why would you bother to vote now? That was a real concern. But also because with two changes of government without elections and with these sort of sort of odd coalitions that were forming and that sort of thing, Perikatan at the 11th hour, it wasn't clear to me that younger voters in particular, but not even just younger voters, would really see
mm,
a value to voting. And so the fact that there was still, in global terms, a really high rate of turnout, lower than is usual in Malaysia, but still higher
right,
than a lot were
right,
fearing, not just political scientists. That to me was really encouraging because it suggests that despite it all, Malaysians still see value to voting. And that's important. And I hope that that can be maintained. Um, I'm not sure what specifically will help Malaysia to maintain that, but I think there is interest in a lot of sort of civic education initiatives. There are a bunch of
right,
young people who are pursuing those sorts of drives, not just amongst the converted, but also in the heartland of really why it matters to vote. The fact that there still is a strong opposition, and that opposition is a different opposition than previously, but has a shadow cabinet, is really trying to organize itself. They want to do a little bit more to recruit women, for instance, and show that they value that part of the population, just in terms of in their visible ranks. But I think that actually ensures, especially since it is younger voters who are, again, increasingly inclined to shift toward PAS, that actually is a good thing for democracy in terms of supporting them. The idea of, okay, so the way that we would support our party is by voting. And so that to me is perhaps the part of democracy that remains strongest, is the citizen participation. I hope that there is space within the current government for structured and meaningful participation from civil society, for instance, because that also can really deepen the sense of what it means to be a democracy in Malaysia, of the level of inclusivity, regardless of what happened. Like, it shouldn't be the be all end all, who is in office, what parties are there, but also whose voices can be heard through other means. Democracy, politics means more than just the election. And so there is this moment in which not just the children of MPs and cabinet members, but others as well, might be able to help to set a policy agenda, since the government needs
right.
one, and really help to contribute to that. So all of those things give space for deepening and strengthening democracy, and are plausible under this system in which there aren't a lot of clear vested interests. There isn't an agenda. So there's actually a fair amount of flexibility that
Right.
there isn't
On
always in
that
this system.
encouraging note, Professor Meredith Weiss, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. It was really a brilliant conversation. Yeah, it was fun.
Thanks. This has
Thank you
been
so much.
fun.
Good night, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.